Hello and welcome to the video. This is Hooves of Doom. And this is a video about the Stormcast Eternals etymology, kind of the inspiration and language behind them. Just before I launch into what I hope is kind of a lengthy series looking at the etymology of many different worlds associated with the Stormcast Eternals. But before getting into that series, I wanted to embark on kind of another preamble about why the choice of words matter in the first place. It really just applies to basically all the factions of Warhammer. You'll have to forgive me because this is, I think, my second of such preambles, but the first was a few months back. Now, I do think that etymology is an important tool, that these words have a specific use and a specific meaning, that they're not just chosen at random. Clearly, there is a meaning and intent behind each one. So take a look at the words displayed here. This is a list of every Stormcast unit, or at least those that I could think of, as well as a few words from kind of Stormcast lore. Every one of these words is Latin, kind of derived from Latin or designed to sound like Latin. They didn't have to be that way, right? This was a deliberate choice based on familiarity, historical legacy, and the type of visual and phonetic aesthetic. You can imagine creating words out of thin air, but without kind of an established context, those words really lack all meaning. So creating a language from scratch is really difficult. It's very common to kind of use things that obviously people are already somewhat familiar with. And, the truth is that all the Western world is shaped and formed by the growth, success, and collapse of the Roman Empire. That historical legacy has, stayed with us to this day. You can still feel the impact and reverberations of that in our kind of daily life, if you know where to look. So for a variety of reasons, our history is this integral part of kind of our mental schema, and the Roman Empire is this irrefutable archetype embedded in our minds whenever we think of what empire means. So consider, some of the qualities that made the Roman Empire maybe a little more unique compared to many others throughout history. It is among the first empires that can be considered kind of global, at least according to their own geographical understanding of the world. And that's kind of an important balance and consideration to think about. It was multinational, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and all kind of under a central authority and a common set of laws. Very diverse, very separated and distinct and geographically spread out, but also somewhat cohesive. It's a stretch not to say that these are the same ideals and values promoted by the Stormcast Eternals, right? They are the first and foremost guardians of Azir, but more than that, they're trying to retake the moral realms for all the shattered human kingdoms, right? They are the primary fighting force of a multi-realm and multi-racial alliance. And also, you can make many different comparisons here, but ultimately, Sigmar's vision is close to that of Imperial Rome. The grand architecture of Azir is similar to the grand temples, forums, basilicas, and palaces of Rome. The armor of the Stormcast Eternals is clearly inspired by the Roman Lorica Segmentata, among other classical designs. A complete comparison on the subject alone is probably its own separate video. And I think about, parts of Roman culture and society like what is displayed in Virgil's Aeneid, where Jupiter, the Roman sky god, often called Jupiter Optimus Maximus, meaning the best and greatest, says, "His ego nec mentis renum nec tempora pono, imperium sine fine didi." Basically this means like, for the Romans, I placed neither boundaries nor time limits on power. I had given them empire without end. Imperium sine fine. Empire without end. It's a very famous line referenced in many classical works. So just in case this isn't obvious, Sigmar, Lord of Azir, the realm of the heavens, is the Age of Sigmar sky god. Jupiter and is basically Sigmar, and Sigmar's Jupiter for all intents and purposes. He too is Optimus Maximus insofar as Alariel and Marathi and the other gods are not quite as equal. Right? He's definitely, I think, the most powerful of them all. And likewise, the Stormcast Eternals are tasked with pushing back chaos, establishing a united hegemony of order to all the peoples of the realm. And they are invested in that same effort to establish an empire across all the realms, and this time, hopefully, without end. And you see that type of historical mirroring in how the Romans established their own empire and pushed back kind of their own conception of what it was like to be in the empire or outside of it. It is very much kind of a chaos versus order mentality, and this absolute desire to push back that boundary, especially in the early years of the Republic. And you can also find in Roman writings kind of the sentiment that what is good for Rome is good for the world and vice versa. You see that in Marcus Aurelius and others. Again, that mentality is not too dissimilar from when we consider the kind of the mandate of the Stormcast Eternals are tasked to fight and protect the realms against chaos wherever it might arise. And so basically you could say that what is good for Azir is good for the other realms and vice versa. Now, naturally, all these points can be applied within the context of 40K and how Space Marines operate within the Imperium, and chapters like the Ultramarines are just flat-out Roman. In both cases, the use of Latin in names and units intuitively provides a sense of familiarity. Latin provides the Stormcast Eternals with kind of a sense of gravitas. It inspires connotations of age and longevity, renown, authority, esteem, sophistication, power, prestige. All these things are wrapped up into that choice of Latin. Words matter, names matter. They're not random, right? In this case, really, the choice of words here represent, designed to project some sort of brand, instill a message, and really channel that historical legacy. So most Stormcast Eternal units have very clear etymologies that support their function on the battlefield. The lore in those cases simply kind of mirrors the language, often directly. But even in cases where etymology is simply kind of conjecture, I think we can still make some logical conclusions or kind of play around with it. You can kind of see my video on Adeptus Astartes, how we can piece together a meaning even if the words and context are completely broken. But here's a simple rule of etymology to think about. There are exceptions, but basically if two words sound similar, they are likely familiar, right? Consider the following cognates across multiple languages. Cognates are words that reflect a common concept, in this case, kind of mother, that look and sound familiar despite geographic and cultural differences. They kind of hint at some sort of primordial language that everyone once shared before it was kind of spread out and became kind of its own in each culture. My point is that even if a created word isn't explicitly Latin, we can still hypothesize about its creative origin. So one final note here in etymology, if you think back to that kind of list of Stormcast units that I referenced, you might recall that many ended in an OR suffix. So take the word, to understand this, kind of take the word kind of tailor, for instance, is derived from talio, meaning to cut or inflict punishment upon something. You can see talio within words like retaliation, but insofar as there's a kind of a cultural meaning that kind of adopted around that word, it eventually kind of becomes like a tailor, right? Something that cuts fabric rather than people or flesh. And the OR suffix here turns that word into an agent. So we have the word to cut, but adding the OR, we have something or someone who cuts. So similarly, you can think of narrator or protector. It's easy to think that those would, perhaps naturally end in ER, but that's not how those words in general particularly work. For the default of many English words, it is pretty common to end in an ER whenever you have kind of a doer, but many Latin words opt for OR. And likewise, that's the same here with the Stormcast Eternals. So a Stormcast Liberator is derived from words like liber or libertas, meaning kind of freedom or liberty. And when we change that word to an active agent upon those goals, it becomes liberator. And so forth with tempestors and fulminators and all the others. So in future videos, I'll be diving into the etymology of specific words and the examples of the connections between the Stormcast Eternals, Sigmar, and the legacy of Rome. Hopefully the first of many. Thank you for listening.